Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about a position that's rarely discussed, very rarely understood, but is one of the most critical roles in the Commonwealth. I mean, we talk about how important the governor is, but it's like nationally how important the president is for 4 to 8 years. But the appointments to the judge positions, the judicial appointments, go on for decades. And the people on the Governor's Council have a very, very important role to make sure we get the right people in as judges. So why don't we start with an introduction?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Muriel Kramer. I'm a neighbor in Hopkinton, and I'm running for Governor's Council District 2. A little bit about myself. I'm a United States Air Force veteran and now a licensed clinical social worker. My husband and I have lived in Hopkinton for over 30 years. We raised our 6 kids there. Competed against Milford in a lot of sports. I hope nobody holds that against us. Again, now I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I got my start working in homelessness services in Boston and Cambridge, and now I work in healthcare consulting for Medicare, Medicaid, and folks that don't have insurance, so for underserved populations. Additionally, I have about 20 years of experience in Hopkinton in appointed and elected roles. I've been on the the select board twice now, so for 6 years, and 3 of those years I served as chair. I've also been on the planning board, the board of appeals, the master plan committee, served as deputy town moderator, a variety of roles in Hopkinton.
So you're battle worn.
I'm battle worn. Yes, I'm stress tested.
I was going to say, the select board, I never understand why somebody can survive that.
So it's interesting. I think that there's an awful lot of work. We're so lucky with our structure in our towns. I'm not sure if you have stipends in Milford, but for Hopkinton, it's all volunteers. And we're really lucky to have so many volunteers with so much professional experience serving on roles. Like, I think the school committee is a huge job, and the select board and the planning board is big, but all of the appropriations committee, the board of appeals.
Most of the
all
committees have stipends except for school committee and finance committee.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 2 that don't have stipends.
Yeah. In Hopkinton, we don't have stipends, so it's all volunteer, and we're really fortunate to have.
But it lets us vote ourselves a raise every year.
Yeah.
We'll go up 10% a year.
10% a year. There you go.
10% times 0?
Zero.
The number stays the same.
Yeah, I was with you. I actually have a math degree under that social work degree, so I can do that little bit of math.
What is the Governor's Council?
The Governor's Council is a small 8-person council that provides, it says in the text, advice and counsel to the governor and lieutenant governor on a variety of things, actually. Judicial appointments you mentioned, clerk magistrate appointments, parole board appointments, also pardons and commutations, like the general pardon that the governor issued for misdemeanor cannabis offenses, the big general pardon. Also the Industrial Accident Review Board, Notary Republic, Justice of the Peace, a number of things, and some bills. So it's a small committee that acts on some interesting and high impact decisions.
Now, there's 8 council people.
8 council members, yes. 8 councilors. When you look at the ballot, there's a move afoot to make it more clear. So hopefully future ballots will say governor's counselor, but right now it still says counselor. So they refer to them as counselors. 8 in the state.
So you will represent 1/8 District 2.
District 2, yep. And it's huge. District 2 has 37 towns. So they are big districts.
37 towns.
37 towns, yes.
How can you even get around to see 37 towns?
It is really challenging to get around to see 37 towns. Some of the towns are a long way away. We go from Needham, Natick, Hopkinton, all the way down to, Attleboro, past Attleboro, to, Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, East Bridgewater, up to Milton. It's a big district. It includes Sharon, Easton, Norfolk, Franklin, just a lot of towns and cities. Brockton, Framingham. It's
Now,
big.
I've got to ask a silly question.
Go ahead.
You have 8 counselors.
Yes.
Isn't that a dangerous number?
So you know what? When I thought about that, yes and no. So it's the lieutenant governor comes in for the votes. So there are actually 9 votes. So if in the event of a tie.
So it's like the Senate, that if it goes
Yes. Yeah.
50-50, the vice president casts.
Similar. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Because I was going to say, it's just, you're asking for trouble.
You're just begging for trouble. That's right. I know. That's why all the boards and committees locally are all odd numbers. Exactly so.
But this is not a full-time position.
It is not.
Or
a
it's not
full-time job.
paid full-time.
Correct. And I don't think it's expected to be full-time. It is a part-time position, but it has a big commitment of hours. So I'll just start by saying that understanding that I got permission from my employer before I ran. So should I win, I'm going to cut back to 80%. I won't be a full-time employee. I'll be a 0.8. So I fully expect to have the time that I need to be both at the State House. They meet at the State House on Wednesdays at different times. They can start as early as, well, I've seen it as early as 10 a.m., but you can start earlier, I'm sure. They meet at the State House on Wednesdays, but there is the necessary time prior to those meetings to review the materials for the candidates and interview with the candidates, to really do your homework. So it's a substantial part-time job.
Let's say a day a week. There are, about 300 judges in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but I wouldn't be surprised
I think
to find
it fluctuates.
find that it's that. And I know that there are a lot of openings, and again, I don't know the exact number of openings, but I know that the courts are often very backlogged. So I think this year I've watched a number of hearings, and I haven't kept track, but it's not unusual to have 2 and 3 candidates being on a Wednesday for hearings.
2 or 3.
Yes.
And you're supposed to be ready and go through it all in one day?
Yeah, so the hearings, you have time in advance of the hearings to meet with the candidates. So, for example, candidates are all the way from Western Mass to in internal Boston, right? So depending on where the candidates are from geographically, they also need to have time to either get to you in person or with Zoom now. We're so capable with Zoom. I'm sure that there are some efficiencies, and you can meet with people more easily and ask your questions, explore their background.
But even if you can be a judge till you're 70?
70. I think you can extend a little bit past that. And I'm not sure the process to extend, but 70 is the official cutoff, yes.
So that's 25, 30 judges a year that will be retiring?
Yeah, it could easily be that. I imagine it sort of depends, because I don't think there's a minimum age. So you could have people that are serving for quite some time. It's a little hard to know. But you would expect that people are pretty deep into their legal careers, pretty seasoned, been attorneys for probably at least 18 or 20 years.
Do you have to be an attorney?
You don't have to be an attorney, although I don't know that it is actually ever done that a judge is appointed who is not an attorney. But yeah.
Because I'm just trying to do the math, the underlying math, and sit there and say, if you're going to, I'll ask you the question, what roles and how you do it, but if you're going to do 25, 30 candidates a year, plus then you've got what do they call the master sergeants, The magistrates, the guy with the
clerk
woman with all the
magistrates.
stripes,
Yes, yes.
the one that runs the place.
Yeah, and there's only one per court of those. I don't know if there's a backlog. I don't know how often those openings come up, to be honest. I would
So-
imagine they're probably few.
So what does the governor's council do?
So the governor's council reviews the materials that come out of the JNC and come out and are presented. I presume there's a background check and presented by the governor to consider a candidate. So there's a body of materials. I have never interacted with the materials that are presented, but I assume that there's a bit of a dossier, a folder, a packet of materials. I hope that's true. And then you get an opportunity to interview the individual. You also get the opportunity to call. You can make calls and you can speak to other attorneys and other people who have had a chance to work with them. You can do your own homework, right? You can really dig in and do some homework. And really vet the candidates. Typically, when they come, once the vetting process is complete by the individual counselors, and they come before the governor's council, it's a little bit ceremonial almost, although it's not a guarantee. I have certainly seen no votes. I have not seen I have not seen a candidate not get through. But when they're interviewed, they get a chance to make a personal statement. So voters, by the way, can, residents can watch live stream, and they can watch the recording. So you can watch the governor's council. You can see the kinds of questions they ask. You can see the kind of material that the candidates put forward. They very often they'll bring their families. This is a big day for people if they've gotten this far and they expect to be appointed. They often bring professional colleagues that serve as references. It's really often it's pretty wonderful to hear stories. Like so many people, it is often easier for other people to speak to your strengths in that kind of environment. So it's pretty nice. I've watched and I've attended this year since I've been running, and we're served by some pretty stellar people, some pretty interesting people with interesting life experience and also very dedicated professional
I
experience.
jumped with the wrong lead question.
Sure.
I want to be a judge.
Yes.
And you mentioned JNC.
Yeah. There is a vetting board that I don't have any experience with that people go through. They have to apply and they go through and from what I know about it, it's far from automatic. It's a serious, rigorous vetting process before the governor ever gets to the point where he or she at this time, recommends somebody
So this
to go
judicial
forward.
nominating committee takes all the applications and decides which ones should go to the governor.
I have a very limited understanding about the judicial nominating committee.
But somehow it goes through them.
It goes through them, exactly.
Then goes to the governor, and she looks at him, decides, I'm going to select.
Yes, but I am sure that the governor has her own process and her own vetting mechanism and is pretty actively involved in the judicial nominating committee. For example, the governor, each governor sets the standards. I may not be saying the right term, but provides the direction
As
to
I say,
the
worry about the
judicial nominating
intent. The
committee.
terms don't bother me.
Yes. So each individual governor provides guidance to the judicial nominating committee and sets up the boundaries and the intent of their administration, what they're looking for in judges.
Well, that would make sense, because don't give me an uber left or an uber right candidate if I don't believe
If that's
in
not who I am.
Right, if I don't believe in
Yeah.
it. If I'm a centralist.
Yeah. I sincerely hope in this day and age that any governor, no matter what political party they line up with, in Massachusetts, would hold fast to the rights that we currently enjoy in the state of Massachusetts today. I mean, I think that is a boundary that governors, counselors need to hold for sure. Civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, rights that we have in our lifetimes advocated and fought to secure. We're so lucky in Massachusetts. I can't imagine that it would be appropriate to propose somebody who doesn't hold fast to those
I've
rights.
always felt comfortable and proud of the fact that, and people will disagree with me, I have a hard time determining some people whether they're a liberal Massachusetts Republican or a conservative Massachusetts Democrat. You know, it doesn't seem to be like, if I go out to the square states,
Yeah.
boy, you can see
Yeah.
the red.
Yeah.
If I go
Yeah.
out to California or the left coast, boy, you can see the blue.
I also think, so this is the social worker coming out in me. I also think that people are complicated, and we don't necessarily know as much about people as we think we know, just because of party affiliation, certainly, but also how they may have decided on a particular issue. Issues are very complex across the
But
spectrum.
that's what I mean, the justice I've always admired was Kennedy. Because I can't figure out which way he was going to vote.
Okay, there you
know,
go.
When you see
Yes.
somebody who you say will always vote conservative, regardless,
Yep.
or always vote liberal, those people scare me.
I like to think that it's important. I agree with you. I don't know that I'm scared, but I think that there is such value in remembering a few basic tenets. First of all, when you get onto a position like this, when you're elected to a position, you serve the entire state. And it's not about your personal goals and objectives. You serve the entire state, especially in something like this. Judges have a huge impact statewide. And I think that it's important to remember that. The other thing is that issues and people and backgrounds and circumstances are complex. I've watched, on one occasion, I watched two counselors who I have come to understand are more left and liberal leaning, and I've watched them come to a very different decision for reasons I could admire on a particular vote, on a particular individual. I think that's important. We all bring different expertise, different lenses, different focuses, and it's important to really be thoughtful about the ways that the decisions we are making on the Governor's Council shape the judiciary for a very long time.
Well, you say there's no minimum age, but in a way, you have to go through college.
Yes.
You have to go through law school.
Yes.
But you could come out at mid-20s, 30 years old.
I think that it would be highly unlikely. I don't know the statistics on this. It would be interesting to see the data. I think it would be highly unlikely that a young person, and by young person I would say below 35, would be put forward to be a judge. I think that there is tremendous value in a depth of experience. Yes.
But even if somebody at 35 gets appointed as a judge, that person, he or she could serve for 35 years.
Theoretically, right? Theoretically, yes. Yeah. And again, I don't know if there's a minimum age, so I don't want to mislead your viewers.
No, but like you say, there's law, and then there's the practical aspects.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of things to think about, right? There's certainly professional experience. There's certainly temperament is the word that's used. But a person who is managing a busy courtroom, difficult situations, has to be someone who can rise above the emotion and maintain authority and control. So there is an aspect of personality and temperament that's going to be very important in judges. And I also think for me, there's a really necessary aspect that certainly that people are firm on people's human rights and civil rights and rights to self-determination as we know them now. But somebody who is going to be committed to professional education and expanding what they know so that, I talk in terms of the right candidate will have a growth mindset, somebody who can adapt and change in meaningful, constructive ways as we learn more about different circumstances. In my campaigning, I've talked a lot about substance use disorder treatment. I work in that field a lot in my professional life. And many people come into contact with treatment possibilities or opportunities when they're involved with the justice system. I think that those intersectionalities can be very powerful. And at every level of the legal system, from the policing on up to the judicial system, I think that knowing more about what we know, we see local police departments with social workers now, right, that ride along on mental health calls and substance use disorder or behavioral health circumstances. That's really valuable because people present in emergency situations with very different needs, and the policing is not necessarily the tool you need for every crisis situation. In fact, I would argue that a social worker and that work stream, that professional lens is very, very important to connect people to help if they can get connected to help. So at any rate, judges, I see that judges can be very effective at helping people in need get connected to treatment and stay connected to treatment, right? We know, the research tells us, and we know from many of us with personal experience, we know that people of color, people who are poor, people who are mentally ill, and people with substance use disorder are heavily overrepresented in our legal system and disadvantaged in the legal system, in the criminal legal system, but also family courts and civil courts, right? And we know that we want to see that change. We don't want people punished for having a disease. We want people to be supported and helped whenever possible. I'm a big believer in diversion courts. When I was working with folks experiencing homelessness in Cambridge and Boston, I had a lot of experience with homeless court, mental health court, veterans court. Big proponent of courts that diversion courts that really have expertise with the struggles or the circumstances that people may be facing that all need to be taken into account as they are sorting through their criminal case in this case, right?
See, I admire the discipline that judges, people like you who are selecting or helping to select judges show, because I couldn't do it. I know I have a flaw that when I see somebody who hurts a child, I can't look at it black and white.
Right.
There's a lot of things I can, substance abuse and yes, but when you see, you hear these stories of these people who hurt children.
Yes.
I don't know that I could be objective.
Yes. I think that I understand that at a very human level and at a professional level. And for example, I'm a social worker, right? And there is a huge spectrum of professional directions social workers can take, right? I could be in the a medical social worker. I could be in DCF. I could be in the courts working with victims of child abuse and so forth. And it's a real challenge to think of. In the social work field, we have to work with both those that are potentially being victimized and those that are potentially being the victimizers. It's enormously challenging. Enormously
Like I
challenging.
say, I admire that
Yeah.
somebody has to help.
Yes.
Even
when it's hard.
Even the animals, somebody has to help. I don't know that I could.
Yeah.
Because in my
Yeah.
mind, I'd look at the babies, the kids, it would just
Yeah.
overwhelm me.
And I think if you talk to a host of different, just to take social workers, for example, I think that you'll find that they self-select out of certain fields because they know, as much as they understand professionally, that you have to be able to engage with people on both sides of the equation. There are some directions you can't go, right? There are some directions that all of us are human, and there are some specialty fields that we can't do, right? And we admire the people that can
And
do it.
somebody like me, I think it's important that you sit there and say, if you hurt a child, you start with 2 strikes in my mind. And that's not fair.
Yeah. I think that that's a pretty human response, though. I'm very child-centric, too. My husband and I have 6 kids. I've done an awful lot of personal volunteering, helping young moms.
How did you
within the
keep
kids.
up with 6?
The secret is to let go of some of the control.
I was going to say, we were 3 against 2. My
Yeah.
sainted mother lived with us for
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah.
So it was my darling bride, my sainted mother, and I. And we barely kept up with 2.
Yeah, it's very definitely a different experience. I think that the hardest, my husband and I have talked about this, the hardest we worked was when we had 3 little ones. So we had 3, 2 years apart, and then we had a gap of 4 years. And honestly, when that happens, you're busy, right? The kind of busy that is hard to keep track of. But you start to have an older child that can do some really meaningful support help in, I don't know, even grocery shopping. I'll go grocery shopping together. That 8-year-old can carry bags in from the car.
Oh.
There's some differences that happen, and I will tell you, it's not the reason to have a big family. But when I see my older kids, the way they grew and developed, being, having very younger siblings, it's really pretty beautiful, pretty terrific.
I just don't know how I'd keep up. I mean, even now, we're going through the cycle where now we have 2 grandkids. And between the soccer, the
Yeah.
T-ball, oh, not T-ball, that's spring, the flag football, the taekwondo, it's 4 or 5 days a week just to
It's
go
a
to their
lot.
practices.
It's a lot. I will tell you that we had, for a long time, we had a rule about the number of activities you could be in, just for practical reasons. You could have one sport a season, or one big major activity a season. I think my kids always did scouting, also for as long as they were interested in scouting. But some dance, gymnastics, school sports. You can't do everything. You can't do everything, so you have to choose.
Now, as a social worker,
Yeah.
you go out, you don't go by yourself on calls, right?
So I don't go out on calls. The work that I did when I went back to school to get my social work degree, I went to Boston College, and they have what they call a macro social work degree, which talks about system change, which was what attracted me. So I went back, and my first job, and actually my professional jobs have largely been sort of system change jobs. So I ran Cambridge's first overnight winter warming center when I got out of school. That was my first job after graduate school. Running an overnight warming center for folks experiencing homelessness, also typically struggling with substance use disorder and mental illness. And it's intentionally a low barrier shelter or
Well, what's a warming center?
a warming center is a temporary shelter. It's not a standalone shelter.
So you don't live
It didn't
there.
have beds. No, right.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
freezing out, and rather than become a popsicle,
Yeah, no, it's dangerous out there.
That's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
and in the warmer states, the hotter states, Arizona, they'll have cooling centers when the temperatures are so hot that it is truly deadly.
But,
They'll have cooling centers.
it's amazing that people can survive on the streets.
It is amazing. It is amazing. I will tell you. So I did, just to dial it back, I did recognize that because there's so much interpersonal, individualized work. I did go back and get my clinical license as well. But a lot of the work that I do is with people sort of in congregate settings or group settings. When I got to know the people, I started in Cambridge, And when I got to know some of the people that were experiencing homelessness and all these other challenges, I have to tell you that I'm pretty inspired by the resilience and the durability of a lot of human beings. The struggles that they have just getting through each and every day are incredible.
The scariest picture in my mind is having the shelters, the warming center, whatever you call them,
Yeah,
full,
yeah,
and having some little kid
yeah.
outside saying, "Please let me in."
So the shelters that we had were for adults only, but there are in Massachusetts especially, there's an excellent response for families and children, and everybody responds to children. It's frightening to think of anybody being out in all temperatures and all weathers. It's frightening to think about people being out and exposed. They never, if you're experiencing homelessness, you never get to come in and lock a door behind you and really have a sense of I'm in, I'm safe, I'm settled. It's a very traumatizing and stressful life. But yes, when we know of children, um, it's everybody's response goes into sort of hyper mode, and there's an excellent system in Massachusetts to get families with children connected to care. Sometimes the hardest thing I saw was young adults, young people who are essentially almost children, right? Very young, and very vulnerable on the streets. And that there's also in Massachusetts, and I'm sure other places, there are specialty shelters and specialty response agencies, community partners that do an awful lot of incredible work. But young people, it's very sad, and they're very vulnerable on the streets.
Well, especially in today's day and age, because when I grew up, and you thought of a heroin addict, I know this is terrible to think, but it was in the back bays of Boston, a sketchy character, and all of a sudden now with the whole opioid thing,
Substance use disorder is a universal
it
problem.
can be your next door neighbor's kid
Absolutely.
who you grew up with.
It can be your kid. It's substance use disorder hits everybody now, right? We now understand it very differently. And I guess what I would want to say, because I have the opportunity on this show, part of why I'm running is because I know a lot about substance use disorder, and I know that it is chronic and remitting and treatable. And by that I mean, like other disease states, for example, if you had high blood pressure or congestive heart failure or a host of other chronic diseases, you can expect always that you'll have steady states, but also exacerbations, or in substance use disorder we call it relapse, right? And it's part of the recovery process. It's part of the disease pattern, right? And so one of the things that I want to make sure I say, and I will want to say as a counselor too, is there's an opportunity when somebody is in treatment alone and is not involved in the legal system. When it happens that they have a relapse, they get invited back into the treatment process at the point of assessment for level of care placement. So some people have different, like if somebody has high blood pressure, some people have different degrees of the disease, right? So that's true for substance use disorder as well. So a relapse episode in the treatment world, it should bring you back into reassessment to get connected to the appropriate level of care treatment. When the legal system is involved, often that is a hard failure, right? So then very punitive consequences happen. And I would love to start having the conversation with future judges, truly, about what if in their decision they did what we do in the treatment world and they sent people back for reassessment for appropriate level of care treatment. That would move mountains. That would be a really big deal.
You mentioned there's different shades and different types of social workers.
Yes.
is a judge, or
Oh, I bet no, I bet not. And lawyers aren't lawyers. There's all kinds of different experiences, right? And one of the things that I want to see, when we appoint judges, are people who represent with a diversity of experience, a diversity of geography, a
so
diversity of life experience, a
if I'm a
diversity of
corporate
racial.
lawyer, I'm dealing with not life and death situations in most cases. I mean, you're a mother of 6. I can't
Yeah.
imagine anything would be worse than having somebody take one of your children
Oh,
away.
well, yeah, it's
But
hard to imagine anything worse than
that is a decision that a judge has to make if they're in family court.
Yeah, right? Family court.
But if I'm a real estate lawyer my whole life and I become a judge, can I be a judge for family court?
Yeah, and I think the answer is yes, right? I know the answer is yes. Whether your experience tracks and carries you forward to that opportunity, I can't say. But I think absolutely yes, and I'll tell you why, because everybody can have a breadth of life experience and professional experience that can contribute to the ways they are excellent in a different role, right? We see it all the time. I don't know that it happens very. Somebody told me a story of a judge I saw in action. Don't ask me their name because I can't remember. And I was commenting on how wonderfully they had done, in my opinion. And someone else said people were worried about that judge when they first appointed them because their experience was very different than the court experience, the criminal court experience. So this is where we were, and civil court experience. It's interesting, and they did a wonderful job. So I think that everybody can bring their gifts, strengths, and talents to bear in a lot of directions. And I think it's important for us to start to open up our thinking to make sure we make that possible. I don't know that a real estate lawyer is looking for, a typical real estate lawyer is looking for an appointment to a judgeship. But I would say that any individual with excellent experience and an excellent legal mind and the right temperament should have the opportunity to be considered.
But if I got the appointment to be a judge,
Yes.
I could see criminal, I could see civil.
Yes. I think that they probably specialize some.
Well, practically, they probably lean towards
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
knowledge.
There are
based on-
family court judges, there are superior court judges, there are criminal court judges. So I think that there's some professional stratification that happens.
So now, Muriel, you get a number of people that the governor has said, I would like to appoint to a justice position.
Yes.
What do you get for information on these people?
I don't exactly know what is in the packet of information, the materials that you get. I said this at the beginning. I expect that there's a pretty reasonable summation of their legal experience. That's what I would expect would be available. I certainly think that we are probably privy to to at least the information that they have been vetted for their background. Whether or not we get those details, I don't know, and whether or not we should get those details, I don't know. That they are vetted professionally makes great sense. And then I'm interacting with their experience and their reasons for wanting to be appointed to the judiciary, I think is going to be very meaningful.
Well, I could see the experience being a baseline.
Yeah.
Like you say, you don't want a recent graduate from Okefenokee Law School being appointed a judge without any real experience.
There needs to be a depth of experience. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know what that is necessarily in terms of, I don't think there's a hard limit, but a depth and complexity of experience, I think, is meaningful.
Now, in your mind, you have judges who follow the law.
Yeah.
And you have judges who kind of promote their feelings. I mean, when we look at the justices,
Supreme Court,
Supreme Court,
yeah.
I mean, I got a kick out of when I heard the next topic to go after is contraception. And I laughed because I said, oh boy, that's going to get you a lot of support. Try and tell these young kids that
It's terrible,
long
though.
discussions are only for procreation.
It's terrible, though. It's terrible. What they are contemplating sets us back in horribly unsafe ways. It's incredible that they're even contemplating those conversations. It's frightening, and I think you have to make sure that the judges you appoint for the future are looking to move us forward into the future and be and respond and react to changing information, changing times, changing best practices, be able to accommodate new information responsibly.
Should judges be evaluated?
I think that is a really actually excellent question, and they self-monitor, right? There's a system. People can be reported if lawyers or other judges or other people think that they are not doing appropriate work. But I think everybody benefits from having accountability processes in place.
See, I can see you don't want an appointment depending on the president for every term.
Yes.
You got to give the
Yes.
justices the freedom to vote the way they feel. But it scares the heck out of me that they can be really heavily into judicial activism. And
So judges, judges set case law all the time, and that's activism of a sort, right?
But things like, and he's a Holy Cross man. I'm from Holy Cross.
Nice, congratulations.
So, thank you. Clarence Thomas, I'm not picking on him for any other reason that I don't understand
Did he
how.
go to Holy Cross?
Yeah.
I didn't
Oh,
know
yeah.
that. I did not know that.
But you turn around and you say, there's law, and then there's just practical common sense. If I'm going to hear a case, you can't take a vacation worth tens of thousands of dollars.
I agree.
And say, well, that wouldn't influence my
That's
decision.
ethics, and you can't tell me it won't influence my decision. You can't. We're all practical people out here. We all know how we see, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of vacations and benefits and gifts. We know how that looks.
Well, you served on a municipal board.
Oh,
You know the $50.
$50.
You know the $50 rule.
Exactly.
You know the conflict of interest rules.
Exactly. And ethics are important. They're
And if
important.
nothing else, I'd like to see it be transparent. Because years ago, the Globe reported on certain courts that if you had a DUI,
Yeah.
85-90% of the people got excused.
I am a huge proponent of tracking data and being transparent with it for a lot of reasons, right? First of all, in courts, you are serving the public. The public deserves to know how you're doing and what you're doing. That's the bottom line. But also, we know that there are deep disparities in our big systems. And we need to know, which neighborhoods are being overrepresented, not because anybody's kids are more likely to be troublemakers, but because some neighborhoods are more targeted and some people are more targeted. And we need to know what is happening. You have to have the data before you can start to correct the system and make sure that everybody interacts with the legal system and actually has the same access, experience, and rights, right?
And even if you can't impeach a judge or fire a judge, knowing that we do it, we have groups that monitor every vote our legislators give.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
there, when the elections come, you get to choose whether you want them or not. But
Correct.
even you can't fire the judge. I'd like to know that
Yes.
the trends
Yes.
are being
Yes.
broadcast.
Yeah, I agree with you.
'Cause
Look, data is an important way to hold systems and people in those systems accountable. Lots of times, individuals within the system don't even understand where their biases are taking them. It's a way of exposing some of the gaps and challenges and needs in a system. Data is really important. One of the things that I found out about the Governor's Council is that while they live stream their decisions, and you can certainly, their decisions are certainly public, they don't keep a electronic record, so you can't easily look up.
Nobody's trending them.
And why not? That in 2024, that's crazy. These are easy data points, and this is an easy, I don't know, dashboard or database to maintain. So the public has a right to know who the judges are, where they are, how the decision was made, who made the decision. If it was 8 yeses and 0 no's, or
If the average of the 300 judges is 40% of the DUIs are dismissed, because I can see the extenuating circumstances of the mother, the father who's bringing home the paycheck, loses their car,
yeah,
all of a sudden they're unemployed.
yeah,
But on the other hand, they run that car into a family. But there's got to be some way of saying the average is 40%. This judge, not justice, is 90%.
So
Why?
Right. So all of those individual cases are going to have their individual stories and specificities and so forth. But the actual hard data points, how many of these cases are seen, how many are disposed of this way, how many are disposed of that way, that's a piece of information I agree with you that the public deserves to interact with and know and understand.
Well, you mentioned there's overrepresentation.
Yes.
Polite way of saying over prosecution.
Yes.
At the end of the day, if some judge is harder on Portuguese people than Irish,
Yes.
the trends will tell you.
Yes. And very often, they may tell the individual who doesn't even know that their implicit bias is leading them this way, right? It's important to know, right? Data helps you confront what is hidden in our explicit, for some of us, but more often our implicit biases, right? Just because we're having this conversation, I'm going to share with you that people can go to a resource at Harvard University and take implicit bias tests. Have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah, so I interacted with it when I was in social work school. And I wish I had the website exactly for folks, but you could probably find it easily by Googling. And you can take an implicit bias test that will help give you a little bit of insight on, for example, if you have biases that you don't even realize about age or about ability and, like ADA accessibility needs, or about a race, or about socioeconomic status. And it's a very interesting first step to sort of get a little bit of insight, because we all have them. They're not good, they're not bad. They're just part of how we have all grown up.
No, but you have to
differently.
understand them, because
Right.
I could not tell you that I look at an immigrant who came to this country to have a better life for his family, her family.
Yep.
Who's followed the law, contributed,
Yep.
and not have a soft spot, because that was my grandfather and my father.
That's all of our stories.
That's everybody.
That's everybody's story. Unless we're Native Americans, that's everybody's story.
So, just understanding that.
Right.
So, and again, I don't know, we have a neighborhood in Milford called the Prospect Heights.
Okay.
It was set up by Draper Corporation
Okay.
to make it easier for the immigrants to assimilate and work at Draper's.
Okay.
What they did would get them arrested today.
Yeah.
Because they set up the 200 homes.
Yeah.
And they said the townhouses or apartments 1 through 30 are for Portuguese. 31 through 60 are for Italians. And it was done in the right spirit, because you don't
Yeah.
speak English, you're just getting used to this country.
Yeah.
Putting them together, they gave one of the apartments to be a Portuguese club, so you could
Yeah.
get together.
Yep.
Now, can you imagine, Muriel, if you went and they said, I'm sorry, you're Irish, you can't live in number 28.
No, no. Let me give you a real, a more up-to-date example. In Hopkinton, we have an awful lot of East Asian, Chinese American. We're really experiencing a beautiful influx of diversity that we didn't have before. In the school system, I watched a school committee meeting and I watched a mom elucidate for people that her child, because on the questionnaire, her child, you have to ask, you have to answer whether English is their first language. She's got a bilingual child. English is not their first language. And they are automatically put into ESL services, whether they need them or not, because the Department of Education mandates it that way. So when her second child, so that meant when her first child, she learned her first child, so she had to fight for the ability for advanced classes. This tracking system hurt him, right? He's fine, he's doing wonderful, but it's a learning process, right? It's an unintentional consequence of trying to give extra supports to children for whom English is not their first language, but it assumes that because English is not their first language, that they are not fluent.
Right.
It assumes that, when maybe they need supports and maybe they don't, right? And so for her next child, I asked her afterwards, I said, what did you do for your subsequent children? She said, I lied. Because she'd learned the system. She.
But it's funny because I am one of those English as a second language.
Okay.
We only spoke Portuguese in my house.
Okay.
I never even thought about it till my darling bride, before we were married, came to meet my parents. And she looked at me and says, don't you ever speak to them in English? And I said, of course. No.
No.
We speak English between my mother, my dad, and I only when there was somebody in the house visiting.
That was an English speaker.
That was only English speaking.
Yeah.
And I still remember coming home saying, Mom, these kids are strange. They don't speak any language.
Think about that broadly for the United States of America. Our kids are not. The kids who were born and brought up in the United States are largely not bilingual.
Right.
And that's a huge loss.
Well,
Where did
especially
we
when you
get
get
the
in the
notion?
job market. Being multilingual in today's global economy.
Is incredible. That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
when I lived in Paris, I could speak French good enough, not for the Parisians,
Wow.
but for the French country. But I started learning Russian. I started learning a couple other languages.
Good for you.
It was just, I was going to Russia quite a bit for business,
Yeah.
so you learn. I started to learn a little bit of Arabic.
Wow.
Now 30 years later, I can't remember anything because I haven't used it at all.
I learned a tiny bit of Turkish when I was little because my dad was in the Air Force for a little bit, and we lived in Turkey when I was gaining language, so I could actually interact.
I love Turkey.
Do you?
Oh,
I haven't been since I was tiny. So.
we used to go 2-3 times a year,
Wow.
my darling bride and I, for business.
Yeah. Yeah.
She developed some very bad habits in the gold souk of the Grand Bazaar.
I have some pretty wonderful stories of that tiny period of time when we were
And forgive
there.
me because I did not thank you for your service
Oh,
when you
no,
mentioned
no,
it.
no. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no. My service in the Air Force, my husband and I are both served. We were So how we came back to Massachusetts, I was raised in Massachusetts, born in Worcester. My husband's from upstate New York. And we came back to Massachusetts. We did our service at Hanscom Air Force Base,
Huh.
actually, and it was a great experience, truly.
We're getting near the end. I think we've gone through most questions, except for one.
Okay.
Muriel, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I hope that people choose to vote for me because I represent, actually, what you talked about a lot, a persistent drive for constructive change. I want to see a smaller reliance on incarceration, a greater reliance on service and diversion and treatment, particularly for people who are caught up in the legal system because that they're sick. It also impacts people at the family court level and the civil court level. If you have substance use disorder treatment, you are going to be in a harder spot in any legal interaction unless you get connected to and supported with treatment. Everybody who is sick, I think we can all agree, needs support services and treatment. And our system isn't quite there yet. We don't treat substance use disorder universally like other chronic disease states, but we're getting there. And we're understanding that we need to get there much more. So I am a big proponent of constructive change. I have worked in town government roles for 20 years. I understand how this system works. I can be very respectful, very constructive, and very purposeful in trying to move people forward in at least thinking about the ways our systems intersect and we can improve them for people. So that's why I hope to be elected.
I want to thank you, not just for your service, because that's what's given us a chance to have these discussions in this country,
Yes.
but for not being one of the people who has ideas and complains and never does anything. There's a special spot for people who follow, put me in, coach, let me try.
Me and Coach, let me try.
I'm willing to work and try and make life better for everybody. For that, we thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a lovely observation. I appreciate that.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thanks for joining us. I made a commitment years ago that I will never ask anybody that's watching the show to vote for a particular candidate, but I'll beg you to get a vote. Learn about the candidates, but cast an educated vote. That's the most important thing. Pick somebody that you feel has your values and vote. Good night, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.